I went ahead and added a couple little conduit here, and I added an earth to this bolt right here in the frame. I also connected the earth here to the Wago earth, which the power supplies are both connected to. So now I'm going to go ahead and wire the bed out from the main board to the input, which is positive and negative. So inputs number 3 and 4. For the SSR DC input, I've just gone ahead and crimped these two here. Get my screwdriver here and loosen up the positive side and run it through here. It's going to go right into this one. Now I'm going to go ahead and fit this underneath. And then I'll go ahead and work it down. There we go. And then I'm just going to repeat that for the other wire. And that's pretty much it for the DC side. So now we've got to do the AC side. Unfortunately, I did not capture footage of the wiring to the SSR and the bed. But the good news is I've got a nice diagram that I used, and I think it makes it very clear. And as you can see in this diagram, one of your bed wires is going to need to go to the SSR, the upper left one, and the other bed wire is going to need to go to your neutral on your power supply. And then the second upper right screw on your SSR is going to go to your live on your power supply. So hopefully you can read all that by the diagram, and I apologize for not capturing that. I totally got sidetracked. I'm just using this Voron mount for the Raspberry Pi, and I've just went ahead and put 2M2 6x8 self-threading or self-tapping screws in here, and then I'll be doing the same thing for each of the corners on here, and those were included in the kit. To power the Raspberry Pi, I decided to use this buck converter, and it takes a 24 volt in and it gives a 5 volt out. And I simply connected the 5 volt to the pins of the Raspberry Pi. The first 2 pins are 5 volt and the third pin is a negative. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and prepare the bed. The first thing I want to mention is that the top of the bed, the part that you're going to put your magnetic sheet on, is the part where you have these countersunk screw holes. So make sure you pay attention to that. You don't want to put the heater on that side, because you're going to need this to be perfectly flat in order for your magnetic sheet to go on properly. So I've gone ahead and flipped it over, and you can see this side does not have any countersunk holes. So what I'm going to do before I put the heater on is I'm going to clean this off with some isopropyl alcohol real well. I've got this laid out how I think I should install it, and notice there's definitely quite a few more holes in the back, and that could be useful if you want to install something like a thermal fuse, so if the bed gets too hot it'll shut off. There should only be maybe 3 holes in the front. I've got one in the center, and then these are going to be used for mounting. I would recommend marking it just to make sure you've got, when you peel off the adhesive, you know where to stick it, because again, this is not edge to edge, so you want to do your best to get it in the center. I've got my little Sharpie here, and I'm just going to draw a nice little blue line so I can kind of see it. What I like to do is just work my way slowly but surely to make sure I can keep it nice and straight. So I'm going to peel back just maybe the first, I don't know, a couple inches or so, if that. That way if you do have to reposition it, you're only positioning the top part. Use your mark as a guide. I'm going to go right up on top of it. Check that it's centered on the left and right. Looks good. So now I'm going to go ahead and just push it down like that. Now I'm going to lift it up, and I'm going to just slowly peel and go. Just kind of peel and stick as you go. You don't really have to worry about bubbles in this stuff. And now some people will get RTV and put it on the edges. I don't really know that it's needed. Some people swear by it, but I think it's fine. And I've never had one of these beds come off. I mean, once they get stuck on, they're pretty much impossible to get off after they cure. Now I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to repeat the process, and I'm going to install the magnet on this side. Before I install that, I'm going to spray it, get it nice and clean. Again, make sure you're on the side with the countersunk holes. That's pretty good. So I've got that nice and clean. One thing that you'll notice is that, like, it's not the full length of it. The other thing you'll notice is it covers the screw holes, and that's to be expected. One of the things you can do right now is you can go ahead and put your screws in here. You're going to need M345s. I like to just cut little spots where the holes are, and that's real easy to do. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the heated bed, and I'm just going to peel this back a little bit, maybe the first inch or two. And then I'm going to come right up to my line that I marked. I'm going to try to keep it nice and flat. Just kind of press it down like that. Carry it down like I did before. Try not to get any waves in it. You want it nice and flat. And now I just need to poke my holes through so I can get those countersunk screw holes. So just take something kind of sharp that'll fit through the hole. And I've got a file here. I'm just going to push it all the way in. We're just going to mark where we need to be. And then when I flip this over, there's a little bit of a dimple where I marked it. So now I'm going to take my hobby knife and I'm going to just cut out that dimple. Then I'll come down and I'll mark right in the center of that. And then I'm just going to try to carve out right where that countersunk hole is. Okay, and there's the one cleaned out, and then I'm going to repeat for the other one on this other side here. Okay, I've rounded out the front ones as well and got all four corners done. And for this part here, just go ahead and insert an M3 nut in here, and then we're going to insert the screw into the hole here with the spring under it. So you'll mount this into the bed holes, and then you'll use this piece underneath it to tension it. Once it's installed, it should look like this with the springs. What I recommend doing is one at a time and starting in the back. Put your spring underneath the hole and then put your countersunk screw in, and then we're going to pinch it down here and add those 3D printed pieces. And that's what your 3D printed part's going to look like on there. And make sure your nut is in. And then you can use that to tension things down. And just repeat that for all three other corners. All right, you're going to be running your wires down the cable chain. You're going to install this with two M3x6 or so flathead screws from this side. Make sure that it's angled this way. You may have to remove it. And then all the way at the bottom, we're going to put some M3 T-nuts in the frame. We're going to run the wires all the way through, and then I'm going to run them out the back through the TPU grommet. And just make sure, like I had to rotate the end on the bottom here, but make sure your cable chain is operating as expected, and you may have to shorten it. I had to remove, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 5 or 6 links. And this is how I run my cable chain. I kind of came underneath. I wanted to keep it out of the way of the handles, so I basically just kind of zip tied it to the frame of the bed, and then I ran it up through here all the way down, and here we are. And it looks like we definitely don't have enough wire here, so I'm gonna have to crimp on or solder on something to keep it going. And I finished the chain off with some M3 10 or so flatheads with the roll-in or the slide-in T-nuts. So go ahead and put those in and lock it into place. This is not my favorite cable chain. It doesn't have a great bend radius, but that's okay. I've gone ahead and routed my end stops and motor wires on both sides to the top extrusion here. Got it laying on its front right now. So you can kind of see how we've got this motor running through here. And I've also got the end stop that's mounted here, just the Y end stop running through here. And then I just come through this hole in the back cover. And I'm using these little clips to clip all the wires in. And that's working pretty well. All right, I've got all my end stops run, the X's from the tool head, the Z, and the wire mounted within the frame. I'm going to go ahead and take my Engineer PA09s, and I'm going to crimp on 3-pin JST XHs. If you're not exactly sure where things connect, I definitely encourage you looking at the wiring diagram that's available, and I'll have a link to that in the description. But the X, Y, and Z all connect in the upper left-hand corner of the board in this picture. And here on my board, you can see right here by the kind of where the USB and the SD card are, it's going to be these three pins here are what I recommend. And we're going to use the first two pins on each of these, even though there's only three. There's three pins, but we're only going to be using two of them. All right, I went ahead and crimped the X end stop, and this is how you want it to look, with the black in the middle and the red kind of on the top there. And I went ahead and routed my Y and Z end stop and plugged them in. The X is in the middle, so Y here, X, and then Z. I'm going to go ahead and wait to do the X until I do the rest of my hot end parts. My bed thermistor wires were a little too short, so I went ahead and soldered on with some heat and put some heat shrink on these black and red wires. And now I'm going to put a JST 3 pin on it. I think that's a little odd, but that is what the diagram says to do. But we're going to use this port right here, PC1. And there we have it. I've crimped it and popped it into the PC1 port. When you're plugging these in, just double check that your pins aren't coming out too. Sometimes they don't get seated properly, so make sure you do that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and mount the CPAP board here to the with M2s, threaded screws, self-tapping screws. There's only one way that you can mount this. The kit did not include M2 by 8s, but luckily I had some from another project, so I went ahead and used those. These are even a little too long. So really what you want here is probably 2 by 6s. But you can easily cut these with some diagonal cutters, so they're not going through too far. I'd use some flush cutters you don't care about. There you go. That's one way to make M2 by 6s. Now I'm mounting the CPAP fan itself to the piece, and these M2.6 by 8 seem to be just the right size. You can see how I've got 2 of them in already, and I just got to finish the third one. Now, in order to connect this up, you're just going to need the gray pin, and I would recommend D-pinning this, and there's really no reason to use these others. They're just going to be flopped around. So I've got a D-pinning tool here. This is actually somebody at Murph gave it to me. It's really awesome. You just kind of you push your pin all the way to the front, and then you insert this tool right underneath it. So you just got to kind of push down. If you don't have a tool like this, you can also use a pair of tweezers, but the tool makes it a lot easier. Once you get this connector done, then you're going to need to move to this connector here. And you can even cut it if you want, because we're not going to be using this. But I like to D-pin it just in case. Okay, I've got that out. Now I'm pretty much ready to go. I can set all these aside, put them back in the box, save them for another time. And we're just going to plug this in, and then on this end, this is going to connect to the printer. Okay, now I went ahead and pulled the JSTXH from the board. The manual says to use the Raspberry Pi, but Vez had posted something on using a port on the board instead, so I'm going to do that. Go ahead and put it in like I've just done here. This is going to connect to the 5 volt, and the connector we're using is PF8, and here is where your connector is going to go. I'll just go ahead and line that up, and then it should go in right like that. Before you mount everything with the CPAP, go ahead and remove these screws and put them over this plastic part here. Okay, and then we're just going to lay it over, slide it over the end like that. It should line up just right. And just put the screws back in. That's all there is to it. To mount this, make sure that it sets in place. And go ahead, I've got the first one in here, but go ahead and use an M310 screw. And that should lock in pretty good. Probably a more elegant way to do this, but I'm getting towards the end of the build and I'm kind of ready to be printing. So I'm just going to use VHB tape and mount this here. My gray wire can easily reach the board. And then I need to tap into 24 volt with the red and black wire. And I'm just going to pull that off the Thompson input. So that'll be a real easy hop right around. All right, the CPAP is now connected. I've got it wired over here on the 24 volt input side. And I've got the gray wire going to here. And I've got the fan mounted up here. Everything looks pretty good. Okay, I'm preparing the hot end. And in order to get this to screw in, I found some M2 by 5s. They're fairly long. And I believe these are 16s. And this is going to mount right over this heatsink. Got the fan mounted. Now I'm just going to screw in this thermistor and tighten it down real good. All right, it's not going anywhere. I think we're good there. And unfortunately, as I was installing the thermistor, the wire popped out. And this is a known issue with the Mellow thermistors. I hope that your kit doesn't have this, but mine definitely did. I would recommend getting a replacement, which is what I did, and it seems to work fine. To mount the CPAP, I removed this from the tool head, which I already had installed, and I've went ahead and installed this piece. You're going to need two M3x8 button heads, and on the back, you're just going to need to use some M3 nuts. And I just went ahead and used what I had. With the CPAP tube connected, you're going to need to cut it, put it over this, and then secure this back to the mount. This then is going to go on top. There's also M3 nuts behind this that you need to secure into. So that's why I removed it, because it's really hard to get to these, to access these. I just went ahead and put this in loosely. So I should have plenty of room to slip the tube into this, as well as kind of this up here, which is going to get mounted. Okay, that went in well, and I've got this kind of loose. You've already seen how I've installed this. It's the same process. And this tightened up just fine. Now I've got to cut my CPAP tube. So make sure you got a heavy duty pair of scissors. And I'm going to cut it right here. Yeah, that came off really easy. But I loosened it, I slid it down, and it's going down pretty good. So I think I've got enough there to secure it. Be careful when you're pushing this down so you don't tear the plastic. You want to keep that seal on there. Measuring out the length based on the tool head being in the front left. You can do front right too. And maybe a little bit of a bend. All right, I went ahead and zip tied this to the tool head. That's pretty straightforward. You do want to zip tie it here, and you want to run it. You're going to need to cut it and then run it through this hole that this then passes through. And this cut end should be placed over here. Now I've got a little bit extra slack. I might end up trimming this, but I don't think you need anything here, but you could put a zip tie around it if you want. That's basically how this part's installed. By this time, you're probably a crimping expert. I just went ahead and crimped my hot end here, the heater, so that's good. And the hot end is going to go right in these bottom two pins here. The other thing that I had to do was put the fan in, install the fan, put it in this bottom port with positive facing out, the outside edge. You also need to put a jumper on here. You can see the 24 volt jumper here. The middle is 12 and the top is 5. And those jumpers are the same for everything. The other thing I'll mention is that these are flipped, so the polarity over here is red on the inside, but you can also see the connectors flipped. So the connectors should be wired the same for all these. And here's where I put the thermistor, and you're gonna just use these top two wires. It's a 3-pin, which is a little odd. I did have to remove the JST it came with, and then I put this 3-pin JST on. And I'm just basically, this is a mess right now, so I'm waiting on some sleeve to get here, but I just wanna try and get something going so I can test everything. But I will show a completed picture here in a bit once I get all that installed. But for now, I'm just gonna kind of loosely wire everything in and give it a good test. And next up, I'm gonna be installing the Raspberry Pi onto the SD card, and this is very straightforward. One thing that I recommend doing is using the little gear head to the right here, and this allows you to go in and pre-configure your hostname, SSH, and everything else. I set my hostname to VZBot, and I use Pi as the username. You can specify a password, locale settings, all that other stuff. And after I do that, I'm going to install this other Klipper utility, KIAUH. I'm not sure if I said that right, but this allows you to install Klipper once you get Raspberry Pi going. So I recommend using that. And I'm just going to be following the documentation for downloading and installing it. I've already logged in over SSH. Everything came up as I was expecting. Now I'm just going to install these. And I'm not going to go through all the steps here. You just want to install it. Klipper, Moonraker, Mainsail, which is what I'm going to do. Probably the rest of those as well. And you can always come back to this menu and install or uninstall. It definitely does take a little bit of time to install the libraries, but everything goes in pretty quickly, especially if you're on a Pi 4. And I recommend following the steps outlined on the install page for VZBot for Klipper, including these update and upgrade commands, and then after that you can just go ahead and manually compile the firmware. And the steps are outlined here. but I'm going to follow this process, and then I'll eventually put the file on an SD card that's formatted carefully, and then I will power up the machine and I should be good. Copied the firmware that I compiled on my Pi over, and I renamed it to firmware.bin, and now this command returns the ID. And on the VZBot site, there is a Printer.cfg sample, and I'm going to start with that and apply my USB ID that I just showed. I've went ahead and uploaded it here, and I just called it VZBot Printer.cfg, and this is going to walk you through pretty much everything you need. There are a lot of include files here as well. Make sure that you have all that stuff. But the main thing you're going to want to do is update this and change it to your serial ID. So I've copied my printer ID from the SSH terminal. I'm just going to overwrite it right here. And that's all you really need to do. Let me zoom in on that. Alright, I've been kind of getting everything going. I've got the Raspberry Pi loaded. I did have some challenges with my steppers and getting those recognized and communicating with the board. But thanks to user PortCube, I got through some of those issues, and there was basically some configuration and that I was missing. But everything's going pretty well. I did remove things so I could troubleshoot a little bit with the fan header. I'm going to be adding that back. I've got the CPAP going now. There was a trick to getting this ran to this pin here. I think I might have showed earlier a different pin, but you want it on the signal pin. But you can control this where it doesn't turn on. Here we go, doing a little homing. And this is the result of my first cube. It wasn't too bad. It definitely needed some tuning and calibration, but it's always fun to just try printing after you get set up. Now with that in mind, there is a lot more that you're going to want to do on the startup than what I show here. Calibrating your rotation distance is a must, and I also like running this nozzle board to do input shaper. And I like to do bed calibration with little squares like this, and it works great. And it's also a good idea to sync your motors, and you can use this simple command here and simply loosen the back two motor pulleys, run the command, and then retighten. This has definitely been one of the most challenging builds I've done, but it's also been very rewarding, and this is a truly high performance machine. There's still a lot of work to go, like this exhaust fan here, and there's also the RSCS side cooling as well as the panels. So this video is really meant to just get you started, and I hope it's been valuable content. Thanks as always for watching Greg's Maker Corner, and good luck with your build.